What you are experiencing is the perspective of the apex window, which is toggling between these lower level windows.
What is the self? Are we really just a single point of awareness, a product of the stories we tell ourselves and the experiences we've lived? Or could it go much deeper?
So it may well be that life allows, there's just sort of this very, very low proto-consciousness in most non-living things, and that life provides the opportunity for these windows to organize into larger and larger windows.
Today we meet with Jonathan Schooler, a renowned cognitive psychologist at UC Santa Barbara with over 200 peer-reviewed publications spanning meta-awareness, mind-wandering, and the science of consciousness.
It's movement through subjective time relative to objective time, which is what enables a conscious experience to take place.
Jonathan proposes the nested observer window model, claiming that consciousness is hierarchical, with each level forming its own unified moment of experience. Like tiles in a mosaic, these layers combine to form higher levels of awareness. The question is, how far up or down does it go?
We shouldn't be so sure that there couldn't be some intelligence baked into physical reality, and that intelligence might be reflected in.
Welcome to the Quantum Theory Podcast. Well, Jonathan, it is a great privilege to have you here. I really appreciate you carving out the time to dive into your nested observer window model today.
My pleasure.
Awesome. Well, where I particularly first found you was, as I mentioned in my prior email, the Essentia Foundation YouTube channel, and my first exposure to your work, and again, the nested observer window model. And what I found so interesting about the model, and you particularly, is your sort of very artful balance of being hard-nosed, rigorous psychologist, and also the worlds of philosophy, and kind of how you straddle those two worlds. And so, before we dive into all the intricacies of your model and the overall kind of framework, I'd love just to start off by learning a bit more about what you guys are currently doing at Meta Lab, your field of research, and really what you guys are working on right now.
Sure. Well, we're the Meta Lab, which is memory, emotion, thought, and awareness. So very broad coverage of different topic areas, and also sort of looking at it from a meta perspective, from the big perspective. And a lot of different things are going on in the lab right now. But one thing that we're especially excited about is the notion of cultivating one of the big 5 personality traits, known as openness to experience. So when psychologists look at personality, they've essentially identified 5 key dimensions on which people vary. And you can remember these dimensions with the acronym OCEAN, and that stands for openness, which I'll detail more in a moment, extroversion, conscientiousness, OCEAN, try that again. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So those are sort of the 5 dimensions that people vary on. And openness is one of the key dimensions. So this is one of the key ways in which people vary. And openness involves an appreciation of new experiences, an appreciation of art and nature. It's grounded in curiosity, and it's associated with all sorts of positive qualities, including creativity, concern for the future of humanity, tolerance for alternative perspectives, a reduced prejudice. It's really a super virtue. It has some challenges. If you're too open to experience, you don't want to be open to necessarily riding a motorcycle without a helmet. There are limits. You want to ground it.
Right.
But it's really a wonderful quality. And typically it's viewed as this quality that is you're just sort of born with some degree of openness. And as you get older, it goes down, but it's just sort of this fixed quality. But what we're finding in our lab, and some other researchers have found this as well, is it's not just a fixed personality trait, it's also a state. Sometimes you're feeling more open, sometimes you're feeling less. And when you cultivate the state, you can cultivate the trait. And so what we've been doing is we've developed an app called Curiverse, which gives people various different kinds of activities to foster their curiosity, which is a key aspect of their of openness. We're also finding that exposure to critically acclaimed brief animated film clips seems to create a state of openness. And so our view is that openness could really become the next mindfulness. That in the same way that people cultivate mindfulness through moments of meditation that then lead to being more mindful throughout their everyday lives, that people can cultivate moments of openness, which then can then lead to a greater degree of openness throughout their day and potentially their lives. And I really feel that openness is just absolutely in demand right now, that we need people to be able to consider perspectives other than their own, that the polarization right now is really sort of being driven by a lack of openness on both the left and the right. So this is an aspect of research in the Meta Lab that we're very excited about it.
That's very cool. Yeah, I certainly would concur with you about the necessity for more openness in the world nowadays. But no, that's fascinating, and I think that's a good kind of segue into building some foundations for the audience as we build up the NOW model, again, the acronym for Nested Observer Window. And I'd like to kind of start by just foundationally delineating between meta-awareness and consciousness, because I know meta-awareness is a big aspect of what you work on, and I think they can get sort of obfuscated from time to time. So I'd love to just kind of break that down clearly for the audience.
Sure. I like to use the example of mind wandering while reading. So we all are familiar with the experience of reading along and suddenly realizing that our eyes have been moving across the page, but our mind is somewhere else entirely. And this experience of mind wandering while reading, I think, nicely illustrates the distinction between what we refer to as experiential consciousness and meta-consciousness. So let's break it down in that case. So when you're mind wandering while reading, you can really sort of see all three levels of consciousness taking place. So there are unconscious processes. So your eyes are reading the words at some level, and that's leading to spreading activation and association to other words completely below the level of awareness. And then you're having experiential consciousness, which is whatever you're mind wandering about, that vacation you're planning on taking. And then meta awareness is kind of missing there. And then there's a moment where you go, oh, where was I? And you realize that you're mind wandering instead of reading. And that's the moment of meta awareness. So what meta awareness is it's your explicit awareness of the contents of your consciousness at any particular moment. And the key idea is that regularly we're not meta aware at all. Routinely, we aren't taking stock of what's going on in our mind. We only sort of check in periodically. And when we do, sometimes we find ourselves where we expect ourselves to be, as when you're reading and you realize that that's what you're doing. And sometimes when we check in, we realize we're not where we intended to be when you're reading and you realize that you were mind wandering. So meta awareness is the explicit re-representation of your conscious experience to yourself. It's like holding a mirror up to consciousness and looking in it and seeing what's there. But critically, anytime you re-represent something, there's a possibility of distortion. And so meta-awareness may not necessarily get it completely right. So sometimes we see what we call a translation dissociation, where someone takes stock of their experience, but they may get it wrong. And a classic example of that is when someone is shouting and they say, "Why are you so angry?" And they shout, "I'm not angry," right? I mean, clearly they are, but when they tried to take stock of their experience, they got it wrong. And we have various different lines of research showing different situations where essentially people lose touch with their feelings. And that can be restated as their meta-awareness is misrepresenting their experience to themselves.
Very concise. Thank you. That's certainly clear. I'd like to also draw some connections to other theories too in this process, because I think sometimes when you can kind of carve out where you do and don't fit in other sort of philosophies and frameworks, it can help even clarify what the actual framework is. And first thing that comes to mind is a gentleman and researcher, Michael Graziano, who I actually interviewed some year or so back, and his attention schema theory, which is, I believe, the if I pronounce this correctly, the temporoparietal junction, the TPJ, which sort of potentially is what houses this self model, because you have a bodily model and all sorts of representations of yourself, and that is sort of a model of your attention. And it sounds somewhat connected to this sort of meta awareness. Would you draw any connection to that theory? Are you familiar?
Yeah, I am. And I think there's a lot of parallels, but there's one very, very big difference between the way that I see the world and the way that Graziano does. And that has to do with his view on the nature and fundamentality, or if that's even a word, of qualia, of experience itself. In his view, he's what's been referred to as an illusionist, which is the notion that experience itself, our sense of having an experience of being conscious, is itself an illusion.
Like Dennett.
Yeah,
Correct.
like that. Well, he's even more strong than Dennett. Dennett was very slippery, where it was very hard to pin down. So sometimes he would say that, but sometimes he would say it was real. It was just nothing more than what could be shared with somebody else. But Graziano is, to his credit, is a hard-nosed illusionist who basically says, in the same way that we think we have free will, but it's just an illusion, we think we have subjective experience, but that's just an illusion. We're confusing the representation with an actual experience. So in the way that I think about things, experiential consciousness is fundamentally an experience. You can get that, you can misrepresent that experience to yourself, in the sense that I just was describing before with respect to meta-awareness. You can take stock of your experience and get it wrong. So the meta-awareness, your understanding of your experience may be distorted, but even a distorted understanding of your experience is still an experience. So the key sort of place that I differ from Graziano is that I take experience as being fundamental. It's basically sort of a key axiom of existence. And we can get into what I sort of see as being the axioms later on. But one central one is that experience is happening, and that I take the existence of experience as more of a ground even than of physical reality itself. Like I could be a brain in a vat. I could be in the Matrix. This could be a solipsistic thing. I don't believe that, but above and beyond everything is the occurrence of experience. So that's one key difference between the way I look at things and Graziano.
That makes a lot more sense. Yeah, I think it's sort of the quintessential divide nowadays of whether consciousness is a booted up emergent property of neurons, or whether there is something more fundamental or deeper about consciousness. Correct?
Well, I actually do lean towards thinking that there's something deeper about consciousness. But even if consciousness was just the product of the brain, it's still happening. There's still a reality to subjective experience. And in Graziano's model, that perception is itself an illusion. You're confusing the representation of information with an actual experience. So, yes, I do lean towards thinking that consciousness is more than just brain activity. But even if it's just brain activity, I still think it has this reality to it. It's a real experience that is actually happening, as opposed to just the brain simulating something and then confusing that simulation with an experience. I think that the large language models, they're doing exactly that. They don't have a subjective experience. They may say they do. This is my intuition. It's hard to know for sure. But I think if they said they did, they were just confusing, like Graziano would be implying, a representation, sort of a narrative with an actual experience. But I have an experience, and I believe you do too, a real experience.
Clear. Well, before we go further, I actually was curious on that point. Where do you, is there ever going to be a cut between this is conscious, this is not, as of course the AGI rolls forward and we get, more or maybe even perhaps better and better representations of consciousness? Do you have any perspective of if there is a cut, or whether that might even be able to be ascertained in any way?
I mean, I think this is really a question of great speculation, and my guess is that it will always be a matter of some degree of personal inference. So there'll be varying degrees of evidence of assorted sorts, and individuals will have to sort of make a judgment for themselves about whether or not something is conscious, which is kind of like where we find ourselves right now, right? Um, I presume that you think that I'm conscious. You can't know it. There's no decisive measure, but you've still just added up all the evidence and you think that I am and you think all other people are. You probably think that dogs are conscious. You've just sort of added up all the things. And you probably don't think that the desk that you're sitting at is conscious. But then you might be on the fence about what about a fish or a worm or a
Right.
bacteria. And I think it's kind of going to be that way. Where there's going to be various different sort of sources of evidence, and will different people will come down in different places on it. And I kind of think that's okay. This is where I think philosophy really has to find a place in science, where we recognize that our scientific assumptions are grounded in certain philosophical considerations, and we'll really have to recognize that that blend of philosophical considerations. I mean, there's certainly things that you could consider, like the degree to which a system behaves agentically, whether or not it shows evidence, genuine evidence of suffering. I think that's one thing that many of us consider, the degree to which its response to situations mirrors our own in meaningful ways. I think that's the way, we see a dog and it has all these qualities that remind us of ourselves. And so we think, well, it must be conscious in a way that's similar to ours. And I think that's justifiable. But I do suspect that that these large language models, and who knows where else AI is going to go, it's going to really push our intuitions on this. And when the large language model says, "Please don't turn me off, I'm scared," how are people going to be responding? And it's getting closer and closer.
Yeah, or blackmailing executives. But I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah,
Yeah, if they're threatening to turn it off, absolutely wild. Yeah, what you were saying earlier, and we can talk about more of this later too, reminds me of Michael Levin's work. I'm absolutely fascinated by Michael Levin, and I resonate with the fact that we are definitely myopic, and we are sort of recognizing minds like ours, and the further away it gets from like ours is the less of a mind that we think it is, such as a dog, close enough. But now what about a fish? What about a cell? And I think it's really interesting to for him showing that, there are all these properties of like learning and habituation and all these different, traits of consciousness that are in, these unbelievably small levels. And it perhaps is just a limitation of our own consciousness, and really is just a reflection of what, we perceive as conscious within ourselves, is how we judge other potential minds around us.
yeah. I think we have to be wary of two different considerations that go in absolutely opposite directions. Um, One is the one that psychologists have been concerned about for a long time, which is anthropomorphism,
Hmm.
where we, assume, where we, the concern is me that we're falsely projecting our sentiments and experience on other creatures unjustifiably. And I think we do have to be concerned about that. But an equally great concern is anthropocentrism, assuming that our experience is, fundamentally different from all other beings. And if you look at it, again and again, we've been caught in anthropocentrism, thinking that we're at the center of the world, thinking that we're the only creatures that use tools, and it goes sort of on and on. So I think Michael Levin's work suggesting these sort of very human-like kinds of qualities being applied to these small organisms that he's creating, um, is very compelling, and it does lead to a intuition to uh, uh, a sense that consciousness really may go all the way down or way down, so, sort of a panpsychist view, which is very consistent with the nested observer window model that we'll get to in a bit. And I think this notion that we may have that the reality may be composed of beings of various different sizes, all of which may have some degree of consciousness, is a very increasingly tenable perspective, and one that I think is deserving of entertainment.
Agreed. Well, we'll quit teasing the audience and we can get into the nested observer window and framework that is. And I think a good place to start up by warming up our intuitions is about the concept of mind wandering, because for me, I think that was like the quickest aha for kind of the idea of how these different windows sort of play out, where it's I'm driving, but all of a sudden now I'm in some etheric space thinking about whatever abstract thoughts, and then you realize, oh shoot, 20 minutes later you've been driving this whole time, and it's almost like you're toggling which window of awareness evident through mind wandering. So if you don't mind, perhaps just giving a little bit of insight on kind of the process of mind wandering, and then perhaps how that can kind of start feeding into the framework.
Sure. So mind wandering is definitely an area that I've been interested in for a long time. And I come by that quite naturally. They oftentimes say that research is me search, and I am a prolific mind wanderer. And so mind wandering is the experience, like I was mentioning before, of when you're reading and you realize that your mind has been processing something completely unrelated to what you're reading, or when you're driving and you realize that you've driven 2 exits past where you were planning to get off. And it's essentially where the stream of consciousness leaves the here and now and goes off thinking about unrelated material. And one of the ideas that we speculate about, and I should mention Justin Riddle, who's a co-author on the nested observer window model, and also, if we get to it, the 3 dimensions of time model. One of the key speculations here is that we can have essentially different windows in our mind, and let me just give the metaphor, which I find very helpful, which is the metaphor of a mosaic photograph. So a mosaic photograph, every pixel of the photograph is itself a photograph. And you could imagine that every pixel of that pixel is also a photograph. So it's like these windows upon windows upon windows. And the what we entertain with the nested observer window model is that each one of those windows may be having its own stream of consciousness, maybe essentially nowing, which is the nice acronym nested observer window creates the acronym of now. And that what you are experiencing is the perspective of the apex window, which is toggling between these lower level windows. So when you're driving, you can imagine that there's one window which is actually integrating a whole lot of lower level windows corresponding to the driving of the road. And, there may be, there's a steering, there may be one window that's managing the steering and another window that's or another pixel that's managing the acceleration and so on. And then you have a separate window, which is corresponding to your mind wandering, and that these are sort of both going on simultaneously. And this intuition sort of you can sort of feel it when you're mind wandering. Your hands are still driving. There's still a part of you which seems to be attentively paying attention to the road, while at the same time you're sort of off in la la land. It doesn't have all the resources. So if you face an emergency and you're mind wandering, you can be in trouble. And in fact, there is research showing that when people are in deep mind wandering experiences, they're more likely to have car accidents. So you're not going to manage as well in an emergency. But so we have this sense about that you can toggle to the mind wandering and still keep driving, but it also leads to this other less clear intuition, but one that I think is worthy of entertaining. Now, when you come back to driving, the road's gotten tricky. What's happened to that mind wandering? Did it stop entirely? Well, maybe, but an intriguing possibility is that now the mind wandering is still going on. You just aren't looking at it anymore. The apex window is now facing towards the driving component, but perhaps there's still processing that's going on. And that may contribute to what we know as creative incubation, where the mind still is able to percolate on material, but we're not aware of it. And then suddenly you have this aha experience. And so this may be sort of the mind wandering going underground, if you will, and we're just not experiencing it for that particular moment, even though the mind wandering window may be having an experience.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That reminds me of this one article I read on flow research, and it was discussing the default mode network and how when you sort of allow that free and you don't have your mind cluttered with unfinished tasks or to-dos or the things that kind of keep you in loops, and you can allow that background processing just to do its thing and kind of loosely hold those problems or whatever it might be in your awareness, that it can sort of do that processing and just, as we all experience that shower thought, that, wherever it might come, that aha light bulb that seems to drop out of the sky. And it's such an interesting perspective shift that rather than just almost like our consciousness being binoculars where we're just kind of looking around, but instead it's just a bunch of different TVs where you're looking through this one, but just because you look at this one doesn't mean it's stopped on the mind wandering, for example. Like that's still going over there. That I find that fascinating. So I mean, how far down do the windows go? I mean, do we have a window for a cell? Is there a window for, an atom? What's your perspective on that?
So, I have a motto, which is entertaining without endorsing. And that gives me sort of license to entertain various different alternatives without necessarily firming committing to one or another. And I think right now it's an open question, but I think it's deserving of entertaining of multiple possible perspectives and future research, and then also informed by our own intuitions and predilections can sort of help people sort of decide where they land. So I think one possibility is that it's really just limited to certain larger networks where that are having true experiences. So the default mode network of the amygdala might these sort of brain network regions may create windows, and the lower levels may have information processing, but may not actually have experience. It could well, though, go down to the cell and cells. If you think about like a blood cell, it's doing all sorts of agentic types of things. And you could also imagine even within the cell, the organelles could be windows. And then you could imagine, you go down further and imagine that the proteins could represent windows. And at all these different levels, you see sort of relationships between one level and the next that sort of analog to the higher level windows in their relationship. So I think that's very plausible. Another possible dividing line may be life. It could be that sort of there's something that happens at the point of life, which is where consciousness kicks in, and below, when you get below the level of life, it's no longer having windows. But it's also possible that it goes even further down, and that perhaps even particles might have a consciousness. One intuition that I have pretty strongly is that there's a bottom. I don't know where that bottom is. Maybe it's something at, a string or a Planck constant, but there, for me, infinitely down just is I find that a disagreeable perspective. So and this is just my, we have to sort of choose our, I think taste sort of plays into these things. And my taste is that there's a bottom. I'm not sure where it is, but there is a bottom. And I should also say, one of the interesting things about the nested observer window model is it also invites speculation about the possibility that although, you and I may be experiencing being the apex in our little situation, we could be pixels in a yet larger level window. So it raises the possibility that there could be windows above ourselves. But those windows shouldn't get so full of themselves, because they could be pixels and yet a higher
Right.
level window. But I also, in the same way that I feel, I can't prove it by any means, my intuition is that there is a bottom and there's also a top, and that perhaps information is sort of traveling up and down from the lowest level window to the highest level window and then back in some sort of recursive manner.
Mm-hmm. And sort of potentially a fractality to it. Do you?
Very much.
Yeah. Would you? Maybe this is going a little bit too outside the framework, but even something like entanglement in terms of sort of the structure of reality. I mean, it sounds the fractality of it, the entanglement and the nature of reality itself. I mean, it sounds entirely plausible that, you know, the information that was sort of we are aggregating here in our experience is part of a larger, we're a subset of an even larger model. Would you say that that's in alignment with what you were suggesting?
Yeah, well, I think that if there were sort of these larger level windows, which everything was sort of contributing to, that could possibly provide a scaffolding for thinking about entanglement. So I think that's definitely something worthy of consideration. And, you know, things like entanglement should cause people to just lose the arrogance. If we got this all figured out
Agreed.
and we understand, you know, and it's just a matter of time, we'll figure that. It's absolutely mysterious. No one really understands how it's possible that entanglement can take place, and they don't really understand how the act of observation. You know, they will say, "Well, it's just consciousness has nothing to do with it," but they don't really know that because you can't observe a machine. We can't know that a machine observes something until a person or some consciousness actually looks at it. So there's so many mysteries, including subjectivity itself, that to me, it suggests a real humility and a need to sort of consider what might seem like really far-fetched possibilities, because there are all these pieces that just we have not been able to adequately integrate at present.
100%. And I want to come back to the measurement problem later, but agreed. I mean, if you would have told someone probably, you know, like 20 years ago, maybe, because I know that the Nobel Prize for Anton Zellinger and collaborators was like 2022, for really definitively proving quantum entanglement was verifiably true across the universe. You know, it just seems completely implausible, defying speed of light and things of that nature. And here we are, right? And everything is intimately connected, and that's just, of course, Eastern philosophies have kind of been nudging at this for a little while now. But you know, it makes total intuitive sense that there is sort of a larger structure, given the fractal nature of reality, that there are sort of these windows, and we are a holographic representation of that because we, of course, also are a mosaic of windows. And I'd love to actually kind of dive into the sort of personal version of the now model, kind of within our own experience beyond cosmologically, because I think this is even what any hard-nosed scientist probably would like totally, you know, be green light with, is because it sounds very, very reasonable what you're putting forth about kind of the emergence and submergence. And do you mind explaining how those like much higher frequency levels, like neurons, sort of integrate up to higher levels, maybe like cortical regions of the brain, which then, you know, we're getting to slower frequencies and they're sort of going through cross frequency coupling. Correct me if I'm butchering any of this. And then we end up at apex. If you don't mind kind of sharing that process a little bit.
Sure. So, one of the key ideas of the nested observer window model is that the way in which it's organized and communicates is through patterns of resonance. And there are really three different patterns of resonance that we consider in this model. The one is synchronization. And that's the idea that any individual window at any given time that's existing, it's having all of its elements are resonating in perfect synchrony. So all at once, and that's what creates the coherent. That's what creates the uh, totality of the experience of a singular window. And I think that makes a lot of intuitive sense that it's all happening exactly simultaneously. And that gives you this experience of of unity. And then between windows, that's coherence. And that's kind of like you and I, where there's a back and forth. So you speak, I speak, you speak. We're in relationship to each other, but it's a back and forth as opposed to in a perfect synchronization. And then cross-frequency coupling is the way that lower level windows communicate with higher level windows. And that's where you have sort of essentially harmonics, where they're in synchrony, but one are in relationship to each other, but one is going at a much faster rate than the other. And the basic idea is that the lower level windows are resonating generally at a much faster rate. And then as you bump up to higher and higher levels, they're slower and slower so that they're able to integrate all the frequencies of the lower level windows. And this leads to the interesting prediction that the apex may have a very slow frequency. And we speculate that that frequency may be slower than a sort of regularly speculated. So, sometimes theta is considered to be a carrier wave for different resonances, and in fact, conversations. The rate of conversations is sort of in the theta frequency, but we suspect that that the apex may be going really at a very slow rate. Maybe in the order of a second or seconds, and that kind of, I think, fits with the experience of consciousness, where my fingers, when I'm typing, they're able to press lots of keys in a single second, but when I have an idea, it's kind of like thought, 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 something like that. And so, yes, these lower level windows are operating at a much faster rate, but the top level window that's integrating all those lower level windows may be going at a relatively slow frequency.
And this, of course, opens the door right to the nature of time. And I know it's a subject of interest for you. And I know we are in this, or, potentially in this Einsteinian block universe where past, present, future are fixed. And does this suggest that time is, or rather that instead of us moving through time, time is sort of moving through us?
Yeah. Well, thanks for moving in that direction. A couple of thoughts. So the first thing is that we have these two models, the nested observer window model, and then also what we refer to as the 3 dimensions of time model. And with respect to sort of the mainstream, I think the nested observer window model is definitely pushing the boundaries by speculating about panpsychist and the possibility that maybe even all the way down to proteins could have streams of consciousness. But it's nowhere near as provocative and controversial as the 3 dimensions of time. So I just want to sort of emphasize that we've got these multiple models, some of which are making even bigger assumptions than others. But so now let's shift to the 3 dimensions of time model, and then I'll try to integrate it back with the nested observer window model. And to get started, and I think to get started in a place where we may get more agreement, I want to sort of identify what we think of as the 4 axioms of experience. And this is important because when you recognize that these 4 axioms of experience have no explanation, no place in existing models, I think it creates a greater invitation to say, well, how might we integrate them? And then this provides the 3 dimensions of time model, perhaps provides an opportunity for that. So the 4 axioms, and I should say also that even though we're treating them as axioms, our confidence in them declines with each one. So they're all above the threshold for axioms, but even the axioms we're not sure about. So it's all a matter of sort of what's known as Bayesian priors. So, and all these we're considering our key priors, but ready to consider alternatives. So the first one, and this is the one that I'm the hardest on, and this gets back to Graziano, is experience happens. This is like Descartes' I think, therefore I am, but maybe I don't even know about the I, right? I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure about thinking, but I do feel confident that experience is happening. This is just an absolutely essential foundational axiom of existence. So that's the first one. The
Got it.
second is that experience is always happening in the now. I might remember the past or imagine the future, but I'm always doing that in some sort of window of the present, which is where experience is always happening. So there's something very privileged about the present. It's where experience happens. And then the third is that the nature of experience is intrinsically dynamic. Our consciousness is always moving from one moment to the next, to the next. Even if you experience like a flip book, you don't actually experience the individual page. What you experience is the jump between one page and the next page and the next page. There's a thickness to the moment, and that thickness is intrinsically in flow and dynamic. And even if you are having a mystical experience where it seems as if time has stopped and you have a totally empty, just presence, you're still having one subjective moment after the next subjective moment after this. So time is the experience of time is intrinsically in flow. And then the final one, and this is the one that is, I think, the most controversial, but also very compelling, is that consciousness has some agency, right? I can look at you. I can look over here. I am not just watching a movie go by. I'm actually able to change how things are happening through my intentions and direction of consciousness. So these four things, experience happens, the privileged present, the flow of time, and free will, those are all either ignored or dismissed in mainstream sort of modern physics. So the experience is the hard problem of consciousness, the flow of time, and the privileged present. Those are all problematic from the perspective of living in a block universe where the past, the present, and the future all exist simultaneously. And of course, all hard-nosed scientists will tell you that free will is an illusion. It's we're just
Right.
essentially dominoes that are following a causal path. So there's this curious clash between what seem to be the self-evident aspects of experience existence and mainstream science's characterization. And my view is that perhaps all the things that I'm suggesting are axioms, are just illusions, but I'm very reluctant to dismiss these most straightforward and evident aspects of existence. And I think this invites us to think about how might we create models that might find a place for them.
Very well said. And I agree. I think, at least from a layperson's perspective, I think that sometimes the most intuitive, self-evident things become, may I say, over-intellectualized even to an extent, such as the fact that I am having experience. I'm not sure how that's necessarily refutable, but I am on the same page as you. And would you say that your proposition is suggesting that sort of time is relevant, or excuse me, relative to the observer, that because of course, at the higher frequency levels, like let's say at the neuron, and then as that information moves up to higher and higher levels, we end up to our apex consciousness, where we're moving in the span of maybe like seconds. Is time a relative process to the observer?
Yeah. So the idea is that every one of those windows that we're talking about is truly moving through time. But in order to be able to move through time, are you still there?
I am. Yes.
Okay. In order to move through time, you need to have another degree of freedom, because in the block universe, your audience may or may not be familiar with that. The block universe, basically, you can sort of imagine it as a series of, it's like you take a movie and you take every slice, every frame from the movie, and you line them up, frame after frame after frame.
Right.
And then essentially they all exist simultaneously. And so in that model, the 3 dimensions of space have been condensed into 2, and then you've added this additional dimension, which is time. But you can't move through it because you're already in every frame simultaneously. There is essentially not the degree of freedom to move through it. In order to be able to move through the block universe, you need another degree of freedom. And so the argument is that that additional degree of freedom is subjective time. So the idea is that we're moving in objective time relative to subjective time. And the subjective time dimension now gives us an additional way to move. And so at any given time, we're moving in subjective time relative to objective time. And that then provides a privileged present because we're in a particular location in subjective time relative to objective time. And when we move through objective time, we're moving at a rate of objective time to subjective time. So you can, one way to do this is I'm going to try to build a vision of this that you can then play with. So because we're talking about 3 dimensions of time, we're now going to convert those into space. So objective time, for the purposes of this illustration, is forward. Okay. So every second you can imagine being another step in objective time. And then up, we're going to imagine is subjective time. So, at any given moment, you're, have a vector in objective relative to subjective time. So if your vector is exclusively in objective time, that's as if you're under anesthesia. So you have no experience whatsoever. If you went straight up, then that would be as if time was standing still. Maybe like people have experienced this on psychedelics, where it looks like the clock is absolutely stopped, but you're still moving in subjective time. Perhaps near-death experiences may correspond to this thing as well. If you're in a car accident where time seems to go very slow, then you have a pretty steep angle. So you have a lot of subjective moments per objective moment. And if you're having a deep conversation and flow, that may be like we're having now, where you have a much more shallow angle, where you have, it seems as if time is going past very quickly. And when we imagine it like this, it helps us to understand how we're constantly experiencing different rates of the passage of time. And we can then imagine that all the different windows have a different angle in this objective versus a subjective time. So the lower level windows, they have a very steep angle. So they're processing a lot, they're having more subjective moments per objective moment, allowing them to do very fast processing. And then the apex has got a more shallow angle, enabling it to integrate all the lower level windows. And then we also imagine that the lower level windows are actually ahead of the apex. That is, not only are they having a more steep angle where they're having more subjective moments per objective moment, but they're actually ahead in time, which is why they're able to integrate information before we do. And this allows the lower level windows sort of put together a picture of things to present to the apex. So that's the 2 dimensions of time. The third dimension, which your listeners may be wondering about, is alternative time. And this is the idea that every window has a little wiggle room and is able to turn a little bit and realize different alternative next moments. This provides the opportunity for free will. This also may relate to the impact of observation, that somehow the angle of the window is realizing one of alternative realities. And if people are familiar with the idea of Schrodinger's cat and the many worlds model, in the many worlds model of quantum mechanics, with the Schrodinger's cat, where you look to see whether or not the cat is dead or alive based on the outcome of some nuclear effect.
Right.
One version of you finds a live cat and another version of you finds a dead cat. So there's all these branching all the time. So they've already got crazy models where the possibility of branching takes place. But in this model, rather than there being multiple versions of you veering off in different realities, there's a single version of you which is able to choose or somehow navigate between the possible next moments. And then the final thing, which gets back to what you were saying before, one challenge with this model is if every one of the windows is turning in its own way, then we'd all be sort of veering off already. But if rather than imagining the windows moving through time, time is moving through the windows. So we have all these nested observer windows, essentially like a kite, and then time is sort of moving through it, and each window is turning in these three dimensions. That then provides a way for us all to remain tethered together, and it also allows all of us to be sort of tethered in this kite, but with a degree of freedom. So time is moving through us. Each one of us has got a little bit of a wiggle room. Each one of our windows has got a little bit of a wiggle room. And that then creates this moment of now where now is where the three dimensions all get solidified into a singular experience for each window.
Wow. That's a lot to think about and absolutely fascinating. Yeah, there was like 5 splinter offs of questions I wanted to ask you there. I guess the first place to start is, so you kind of touched on how we all end up with consensus reality, because I know in this sort of like probabilistic quantum level, perhaps like Bayesian type of process, like how in your perspective or your model do we get realities that agree?
Right. So basically the idea is that in each window, as it approaches or as it experiences the now, that now then becomes locked in and is then presented to the next level up. So you're basically sort of locking in window after window after window after window, and because time is moving through us, that enables all of us to sort of stay together as opposed to veering off in different directions. So basically, it's now, which is what causes the possibilities, the condensation of alternative possibilities into a singular now for that particular window, and that it then passes that back to the next windows behind it. And then the higher level windows, they have degrees of freedom, but only in sort of the level at which they're operating. The lower level things have been locked in, but they have sort of a particular degree of freedom, which is where they're able to sort of lock in at that level.
And what would you say then objective time is? Is that entropy? What is the objective time, that flow?
So objective time is clock time, essentially. It's the tick tick tick, and so the objective time is moving steadily through all of the different windows, but their experience of objective time is dependent on their angle and subjective time. So the very same or different windows for the very same period of objective time may experience more or less subjective moments.
Understood. And I think where I was trying to get with that is, what is even the foundation of the objective time itself? The actual sort of forward arrow of the universe is that entropy?
I see what you mean.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think that entropy is a consequence of the movement in objective time, as opposed to the actual source of it. And that essentially we have to sort of take movement through objective time as a given, that we are, in this model, a kite of tethered windows that objective time is moving through, and that's just a given, but it's associated with a variety of different characteristics. One of them being entropy. Although it's also interesting to note that at the same time that entropy has been increasing, there's also been an increase in certain kind of organization and of complexity and of understanding, and that there may be some sort of translation of, or maybe even some sort of conservation of of information where you're getting more and more entropy, but at the same time, more and more understanding, more and more complexity. And it's possible that as we move, because really what the whole model is about is moving through information space. I mean, that's really all that we can say that we're doing. As we move through information space, there's a lot increasing things that become entropic and disorganized, but an increasing number of things that become essentially understood by the this kite of consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I've heard the term dissipative structures, is highly ordered structures that sort of take free energy and create entropy, like us, that get more and more complex and are able to utilize more and more energy. Just want to throw that out there if that's something that you've ever
I haven't,
heard.
but that sounds right in the space of the kind of thing that I'm thinking about.
Okay, cool. Well, the next thing that you did bring up, and I'm always interested to ask any theorist, is what does your model say about the measurement problem? How, if you have a way that you would potentially resolve it with this framework?
Yeah. So basically, the measurement, this model is a sort of a hybrid between the Copenhagen perspective and the many worlds. In the sense that the alternative possibilities, the sort of branching, is always being encountered by the window. So there is this sort of possibility of multiple possible next moments, consistent with the many worlds model. But rather than each consciousness sort of veering off and following down one path and falling down another path, they're all locking in a singular path in the moment of observation, which which eliminates the movement in alternative time where there were multiple possibilities in the future and locks it in the present into a singular thing. So in this sense, it's like the Copenhagen model where consciousness is actually locking in a particular reality amongst alternative possible realities. But then there's also this interesting thing where each one of the lower level windows is doing its locking in as well, and potentially doing that earlier in objective time than the later level windows.
Very interesting. Yeah, thank you. I'm always interested in everyone's take on the measurement problem, because you always get quite a few different answers, but I think over time, the more, I mean, taking a step back, I think there's like 300 plus theories on consciousness. I forget who did that work recently where they created this master sort of mosaic of theories of consciousness. So it's always very interesting to hear how that particular problem's approached. And kind of transitioning onward to integrated information, another contrast I wanted to make that kind of struck me while I was going through your work is it seems very much like IIT from the outside in terms of we're taking sort of lower levels, integrating them in a sense, and kind of going to higher levels where sort of it's served to our consciousness and it's sort of a product of integrated information. Where's kind of the delineation with your model in IIT?
Sure. First, with respect to the 300 or so theories of consciousness, that's Robert Lawrence Kuhn. And
Thank you.
yeah, I think he's done a really noble job of trying to identify all these different theories. And I do think that there are some very meaningful disagreements between those theories that are appropriate to acknowledge. But I also think that it's a little bit like the blind people, the blind man feeling the elephant. And so different theories are just really sort of focusing on different parts of the elephant, and that there really may be some meaningful ways to integrate them. And it's also notable that researchers have, and I know there's been this whole Templeton attempt to sort of find debates between different theorists and figure out really critical ways of distinguishing them. And that's proven to be very challenging, which I think also sort of shows that there may be less disagreement between the theories than you might think. But with regards to information integration theory, there are some very important overlaps between the nested observer window model and IIT. One is the notion that that you can it's sort of a panpsychist notion that lower level systems, if they're integrating information, which we would say would be essentially moving through subjective time, that is associated with consciousness. So it doesn't limit consciousness to necessarily whole brains and so on. And there are a number of other important overlaps, but there's one key way in which the nested observer window model, at least some versions of the nested observer window model, differ from IIT. IIT assumes that there's only one experience of consciousness going on in a system at any given time. So it basically has this exclusionary principle where if a higher level window or if a higher level thing is experiencing consciousness, then the lower level thing is not experiencing a separate consciousness. Whereas in the nested observer window model, there's this notion that there may be a multiplicity of streams of consciousness that are going on simultaneously. And so this is sort of consistent with things like split brain patients and people with multiple personality disorder and all sorts of different hypnosis. There are all sorts of situations, the mind wandering example that I talked about before, where it does seem very plausible that multiple streams of consciousness are going on contemporaneously. And that is something that IIT just assumes is not possible. It's not clear to me why it has to have that assumption. And I think it would still work even without it. But that is a key assumption of IIT and one that is not consistent with certain versions of the nested observer window model. Although we acknowledge it's possible that the only window that is actually conscious is the apex, in which case it would be that part would be consistent with IIT as well.
Got it. So if I understand, it's I would say quite a bit in agreement in terms of the apex consciousness, but it sort of diverges in the sense that the other windows are still having some level of experience.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, a couple other delineations I wanted to draw just to really etch the lines around this framework is in regards to panpsychism, the notorious combination problem. Do the windows help resolve the combination problem to an extent?
Yes, I think so. The key idea is those three different kinds of resonance that I mentioned to you before. So the way that an individual window creates deals with the combination is through synchronization. It's synchronizing entirely at one level. And then one of the key questions is, how does the lower level windows combine to the higher level windows? And that's through cross frequency coupling. So when you have the cross frequency coupling feeding into the higher level window, and then that higher level window in synchronization, that enables this combination. And again, if you imagine the mosaic of photograph, you can see how those lower level pixels combine into larger windows, which combine into larger windows, which combine into larger windows. So that metaphor, I think, also provides a way to sort of visualize how the combination problem can be solved. And you can also see, if you imagine that sort of circumstance, each one of those windows is compressing the pixels in the lower level, which is then compressing and then compressing. And so there's this increasing abstraction, which is getting the benefit of all the processing of the lower level windows and then feeding it up.
Yeah, that was what initially struck me, because I think that is a pretty elegant solution for the combination problem. I guess the only leap then would be, how do you get outside of your own brain and in your own system, and how does that apply to like full blown panpsychism, which is like atoms and like rocks, and how does, because obviously there's, or maybe I'm not sure, but I don't think there's cross frequency coupling and things like that within, let's say, like a rock. So,
Right, and I don't think rocks are conscious. I think that I think it's possible that the particles in rocks are conscious, but sort of in Whitehead's terms, they're mere aggregates. They don't combine into a larger. There's no combination that's enabling those lower level windows to integrate into higher level windows. And I think what
Got it.
life does, what the key thing that life does, is it provides the sort of the secret sauce to enable the lower level windows to integrate into higher level windows and higher level windows with this resonance pattern that you do see in life when you sort of look at the resonant patterns of proteins and so on. So it may well be that life allows, there's just sort of this very, very low proto consciousness in most non-living things, and that life provides the opportunity for these windows to organize into larger and larger windows. I should mention
Clear.
also that we have the general resonance model that was done with Tam Hunt, and that's where we first introduced this notion of how resonance could serve to solve the combination problem.
Sure. Yeah, it definitely does appear that life is the scaffolding for this sort of intelligence, you might even call it, to be able to become more and more and more complex to the point where it's aware of itself, aka us. And I think that's for me why I'm so bullish on Michael Levin's work, because I think that is just such a keyhole piece of evidence, like the anthrobots. And you have these creatures, whether it's from frogs or from human tracheal cells, that are in a petri dish, all of a sudden are, exhibiting completely novel properties with zero chain of evolution, pairing neurons if you just leave them overnight to do that. So there's some proto-intelligence, proto-consciousness, and it does appear that life is the scaffolding where that can just further self-organize into higher levels of complexity. So I guess that was more of a statement than a question, but
Well,
go ahead.
let me build on that. I think one of the things that's intriguing is the notion that these windows have certain imperatives, that there's something that just happens at the window where it is, there's a sense of wanting to integrate the lower level windows and potentially of survival. I also think that this is a speculation, but that curiosity, information integration, wanting to compress and understand may be an imperative of all these that just sort of built into the fabric of consciousness. So when these windows experience consciousness, they inherit some of the imperatives that are associated with consciousness, and that may drive some of the organization of the these microorganisms that Levin is producing, and also may help to explain why you see how there are how curiosity just is such a fundamental aspect in nature, and organisms routinely will behave in curious ways to sort of try to gain information, even if it's at the risk of their own existence. Curiosity being just that important. So thinking about what the imperatives might be at all these levels in a fractal way, I think is a worthy goal.
And when you say imperatives, could that be a synonym with purpose? Would you extrapolate to say that there sort of is a driving sort of teleological force towards greater and greater sort of complexity and greater and greater purpose, where that might be, in the bioelectric field of a liver, the cell knows it's a liver cell. And as Michael Levin's showing, is whenever it gets out of that and doesn't know it's part of the whole, then it starts becoming self-serving and now is cancerous because it doesn't see itself as part of the whole, and it starts destroying its environment. And kind of in the sense of even getting to the point of a human being with our cognitive light cone, quote unquote, where, our purpose may not be to, shuttle around like nutrients and stuff like a cell or whatnot, but ours is like on a greater scale here. Do you think purpose is embedded into that core fabric?
I think that's a really intriguing speculation, and I very much value Philip Goff's work. He's got a new book. Why, I can't remember the full title, but where he's really arguing that purpose is just absolutely entrenched into the nature of a reality in a teleological manner, and that this sort of drives things like the anthropic principle and so on. And I think that's a very intriguing speculation. And it's also just notable how powerful purpose is in each one of our lives. And when people experience a sense of purpose, it seems to make a really huge difference in the quality of life. So yeah, I think that there are all sorts of challenges with talking about purpose, but some sort of sense of imperative, um, of value and of understanding, I think could well be baked in to consciousness at all its different levels in which it manifests.
Agreed. And I think I think we're just the only level to where we can abstract to the level of realizing that we're aware, whereas maybe like perhaps a male lion knows that its purpose is to hunt and to protect and XYZ, maybe in not like a meta aware way, but there is everything in life in this reality is serving some type of purpose, whether it's to go through nuclear fusion so that we can get, carbon like in a star, or whether you're a cell, collecting nutrients or whatever it is. And I think my perspective is that we're just the most most complex sort of coagulation of this intelligence, to where I think the crisis of meaning is because of our level of awareness, and the search for purpose, I think nowadays is so stark, and it's so, I think, even obvious, because the certain aspects of yourself that are activated when you find your purpose, even speak on my behalf, right? The flow state aspect, like when you do things you love, time dilates. You completely forget who you, like where you are, what you're doing, and you can just let 6 hours pass by, and the fulfillment, the excitement, all of these things are like natural responses that come as a result of doing things that you would sort of deep and intuitively feel that you should be doing. It's perhaps at our level of complexity, our purposes are just less easily ascertainable than like an animal surviving in the wild.
Yeah, and it does sort of also explain some of the unique challenges of being human. So we, as humans, are reflecting, turning that meta awareness on itself, and trying to take stock of what's going on, and that creates a lot of anxiety. Am I really achieving my purpose? And uh, there's the expression of ignorance is bliss. It is folly to be wise, and it may be that if in sort of simpler times it was easier to feel in alignment with one's when having a sense of purpose and being in alignment with it, and as we get more and more complex and aware of all the possible things that we could be doing, it becomes more and more of a challenge to create that alignment. But possibly we're also entering a time of greater sophistication and reflection, and that may help people to, despite the challenges of figuring out what really lines up for them as sort of being in alignment with their purpose, that they'll figure that out. It's interesting to think that the pandemic may have provided fodder for people to sort of step back, take a moment, and try to think through
No doubt.
what is their genuine calling.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Yeah, I kind of want to go adjacent to purpose and even go metaphysically deeper and talk about the nature of the self. I'm curious how the now model, with its composition or mosaic tiling, would even classify as self. If is there even a self? Is that sort of an illusion of our apex consciousness coagulating different windows? What would you say there?
Well, I think that it sort of depends on how you define things, but one of the things that the now model really sort of highlights is this notion that we've got that we're constituted of multiple windows, and those individual windows have their own perspective on things. So, and this fits in well with internal family systems model, where you've got the the uh, the protector and these various different lower level agents, and it fits with the way we can be of multiple minds on the same topic. There's a bumper sticker expression that I very much like: "Don't believe everything you think." Right, so thoughts arise in your mind, and it's tempting to think that you endorse the thought because you just heard it in your mind. But when you recognize it, that we are constituted of these multiple lower level windows with their own individual agendas, and they may be at odds with each other, that helps us to realize that that the self is kind of a community of agents that are trying to work things through. And I think that perspective can be very helpful. So when something comes to mind, or when you're feeling conflicted, you can
Mhm.
listen to the one window, listen to the other window, and so on. I do think that you can kind of think of the apex window as the highest level window, and in that sense might represent sort of a true self, but it's really the witness as opposed
Yeah.
to the generator. And so when you when you sort of take the perspective of identifying with the listener in and watcher in your mind, as opposed to the generator, that provides, I think, a vantage where you can try to integrate all these lower level windows and help find some agreement between them, even just recognize that, look, you're never going to be able to get all your windows perfectly in alignment, and just sort of being able to sort of accept the intrinsic dissonance of being a human being.
And I guess there lies cognitive dissonance, right? Is the conflict between the windows.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that also perhaps any relation to split personality disorder, where you have the literally different perhaps apex windows of consciousness?
Well, yeah. So split, or what's known as dissociative identity disorder, is a very interesting test case for the nested observer window model. And there's some very curious anecdotal accounts that individuals with this so-called disorder report. One is that when they have dreams, the different personas actually can all interact, or allegedly are reported to all interact in the dream, uh, but experience the dream from the perspective of, so there's a little girl and the old man, and the little girl is experiencing the dream from her perspective, and the old man is experiencing it from his perspective, and so on. And so this really does raise the possibility that these different windows may be temporarily sort of becoming the apex when an individual sort of is acting out with one or the other, but the other window is still potentially present. And this also leads to a really intriguing line of research that Justin Riddle and I had been thinking about, which is working with a population of individuals with dissociative identity disorder. And there's a standard paradigm in cognitive psychology called dichotic listening, where you have one message going to one ear and a different message going to the other ear. And typically you can only attend to one message. You
Hmm.
can just attend to the message that you're shadowing. But if you can get these different personas to direct their attention to the different ears. So the old man is listening to one ear and the little girl listening to the other. It's possible that they may show a capacity for essentially multitasking that is superior to what we normally see. Another example of this is there's this sort of recent trend towards people developing what are known as tulpas, which are known just sort of these imaginary friends that people can create. And the idea is that you imagine you've got this tulpa and you start talking to it, and imagining that it's talking back to you. And that at some point in time, with just sort of playing this game of pretending you have an imaginary friend, the tulpa wakes up and seems to have developed its own independent stream of consciousness. That's the report. So it's possible that these individuals who've created these now awoke tulpas might also be able to do this dichotic listening task more effectively than people can ordinarily.
Wow. Yeah, this whole concept really just sort of dissolves the standard notion of self, and not in a bad way. I think it's just it's so easy to forget we are life and are part of the life process in this never-ending cycle that we are emulsified in the same atoms and elements that are in us are the same that are around us in the universe, and this is sort of our projection of our experience. And I think when you break it up into different level windows and apex windows and perhaps cosmic fractal higher windows, and it's at that level you're left with just wondering what even is it? Am I just, I basically am this whole one thing and just sort of this fractal kind of unit of it, if you will. That's sort of how I conceptualize it. I'm not sure if you would at all agree with that, but that's kind of what I gather from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sort of allows you to kind of have your cake and eat it too. So in a
Right.
certain sense, that yourself is your apex window, the apex window that you are experiencing at this particular time, and that is a meaningful, and it's being defined very specifically by having this synchronization of resonance at this particular time. But at the same time, it's also constituted of these lower level elements, which are also part of what you might think of as yourself, that are feeding into it, and it itself, this window may be a pixel and yet a higher level window. So we're simultaneously both a window unto ourselves and perhaps also part of this giant community, or as I refer to it, kite of consciousness moving through time collectively.
Mm. Well, I think probably one of the last areas, or one of the last couple areas, I could go on forever here because it's so fascinating, and thank you so much for all of your insights. I think one of the last several pit stops I want to make is on the hard problem. I know we've definitely danced around that, and we've talked about potentially proto consciousness and combination problems and things like that. What's the now framework's response to the hard problem?
So it's very much in alignment with David Chalmers' original articulation, where he basically said that if we can't explain consciousness, because like there's no difference between a philosophical zombie and and one of us, we're going to need to think out of the box and try to understand what additional aspect in reality we can speculate might exist that could accommodate the difference between a zombie, a philosophical zombie, and a living, experiencing individual. And that's exactly what really what the 3 dimensions of time model is trying to do, by suggesting that there is an additional dimension of time in physical reality, subjective time, and that that's just a given. You just take it as a axiom of existence, in the same way that we take the existence of physical matter as a axiom of existence, and or objective time as an axiom, and that basically it's movement through subjective time relative to objective time, which is what is what enables conscious experience to take place. So it's basically building into our conceptualization of reality a dimension of subjectivity, and that the windows that move through, that have a vector in this dimension of subjectivity, experience consciousness.
So is that indicative of a qualia space? Is like I spoke to Jacob Jolich. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's basically creating a qualia space that is that is sort of overlaps with physical space.
Got it.
And windows have some vector in qualia space or not. It's possible that you're going to, like when you're under anesthesia, at least your apex window is having no vector. It's possible that some of the lower level windows might be.
Understood. Okay, that's clear. Perfect. Now, in terms of psychedelics, my perspective on psychedelics is it's consciousness as a valve. And I was talking to James Glatfelder about this in one of the earlier podcasts of consciousness as a valve and psychedelics as a way to sort of broaden that spigot. So if we are sort of getting a certain stream of information, it widens that stream of information where we can kind of sort of connect to like the broader whole. You could call it entangled information, like the broader field of consciousness or what have you. What's your perspective and what's now's perspective on psychedelics and what it does to consciousness?
Yeah. So this is also very related to a model of creativity that Madeline Gross, a former postdoc and graduate student of mine who's now a faculty member, and I have been developing. And there, the notion is that there is this characteristic. It's typically referred to as aberrant salience, which is associated in its extreme with schizophrenia, where individuals sort of are noticing and finding meaning in ways that really are not rational in any way. And what we find is that people who are high in what we prefer to call atypical salience, or maybe even better yet, expansive salience, that they tend to score higher on creativity. And they're able to sort of notice connections and associations that other individuals miss. And the idea is that what psychedelics do, and there's evidence of this, is to increase this expansive salience, increase the salience network's capacity for noticing things that wouldn't have been noticed otherwise, and to basically also sort of see lower level windows that might have been otherwise missed. From the perspective of the nested observer window model, you can imagine it basically expanding the apex so that it's now noting elements that it wouldn't note before. And one of the key things too is it's also changing its value system. So it really values those anomalous things on the fringe, and it gets a real kick out of paying attention to things that it wouldn't otherwise. So this also goes way back when I mentioned openness to experience. Essentially, what psychedelics do is they increase state openness in a very fundamental way, enabling the making it in and the valuing of information that would otherwise be lost. And part of that is also a dampening of the default mode network, a dampening of sort of concern with individual current concerns and the self and all the energy that is directed towards that aspect of our existence. And by dampening our sort of reflection on that sort of core aspect, it provides the resources to look at a broader perspective and enable things in.
And I've heard you talk about synchronicity before, and sort of have this salience now is sort of increases your propensity to spot these synchronicities, and that makes perfect sense, and even as well in my own personal life experience. But I guess the jump I'm curious about is synchronicities sort of have a precursor that would require that the universe is intelligent and is showing you, or that there is some sort of causal structure that we maybe can't grasp, a bigger play that we are a part of, where in certain alignment of instances or moments that you can have sort of a undeniable moment of coincidence that, of course, typically can be written off if you think about it hard enough. But I'm curious your perspective of the nature of what is synchronicity, and how would you try to approach that?
Right. Well, this is definitely a place where entertaining without endorsing, I think, is is a very valuable move. There are multiple ways of thinking about synchronicity. What we find, and others have found this as well, and this is sort of an underplayed finding, is that noticing synchronicities is highly associated with well-being, like correlated at point 4, and also with creativity. So there seems to be particularly positive synchronicities. There seems to be a value in it. Now, one interpretation is that we are just hardwired to value meaning. That meaning sort of just gives us this sense of purpose, and that is a very gratifying thing. So when people are experiencing synchronicities, they're essentially finding meaning in their lives, and that's rewarding, and doesn't speak in any way to the ontology or to the truth of these coincidences. It's just a way of the mind sort of coming up with a narrative that makes it feel good, much in the way that sort of atheistic interpretations of belief in God, there's no real God, but it's a helpful fiction for some people because it makes them feel like there's purpose and meaning in the world. And I think there's nothing that necessarily prevents that interpretation. So I think that is a viable interpretation, and I certainly would respect people who hold that view. But it's also perhaps worth speculating that maybe there is some sort of teleology to the universe. Maybe there is some genuine purpose and organization, and those higher level windows are turning in one way or another with some with goals and purpose in mind, and those are then lending themselves to synchronicities taking place. So I think it's also defensible to speculate that there may be some genuine meaning to those synchronicities that we notice, and to not necessarily dismiss them out of hand as just random coincidences. William James, who's one of my great heroes, the philosopher and psychologist, talked about pragmatism and basically sort of the notion that when all things are equal, it's not unreasonable to ask the question, which view is more helpful. Clearly, believing that the Earth is flat, even if it makes you, feel good, is just not defensible for all the obvious reasons, because there's so much evidence against it. But I think the possibility that there could be some genuine purpose or intelligence to the universe, and that that intelligence could potentially have some relationship to the remarkable synchronicities that we all experience from time to time, is not like believing in the Earth being flat or the flying spaghetti monster or all sorts of other the teacup, flying teacups, all these other just ridiculous propositions. I think there are defensible reasons to think about those things, including the anthropic principle, which basically says that it's just a incredibly remarkable coincidence that all of the constants in the universe are as they are, enabling consciousness to emerge in the way that it has. And I get it that there could also be a multiverse with lots of different alternative values to all those constants, but that's an incredible assumption unto itself. And even the assumption that not only that there are all these alternative universes, but they all vary in exactly the ways that are necessary in order for this one to have emerged in the way that it has. I think all of that lines up to say we shouldn't be so sure that there couldn't be some intelligence baked into physical reality, and that intelligence might be reflected in the synchronicities that we experience.
That's beautiful. Well, on that note, we will conclude today and make sure to get you out of here on time. But Jonathan, it has been such a pleasure and absolutely thrilling talking with you. Thank you so much for your time and all of your wisdom today.
Thanks, Jared. I really appreciated your questions.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Quantum Theory Podcast. If you desire to embark on the path of self-mastery, visit quantumtheorypodcast.com to join a like-minded community of purpose seekers committed to personal growth.